Hello and welcome to ESL Revolution, everyone. I am your content creator and professor, Dr. B. Welcome back to the channel. In my hand, I have some notes. Simple notes, of course, but notes nonetheless. I don't do that very often, but I did want to remember a couple of things. This is a student video, or this is a topic chosen by a student that they wanted to know. Last week I did SooHyun's first question, and this week I'm going to tackle her second question. If you haven't watched the first video, bing, right there, I'll put a link up there for you to take a look at that. And again, thank you very much. Shout out again to SooHyun for giving me the second question for this week. And this is being recorded on a happy Saturday to you all. Happy weekend to you. You won't see this, of course, until Wednesday, but that's okay. Because as long as it gets recorded and uploaded as per my new setup for the YouTube channel. Remember, if you haven't subscribed, click the button, click the notification, and you will get those chimes or dings or visual little pop-ups to say that I have added something to the channel. So the second question that I have for you today is the difference actually between, or some of the differences between South Korea and Canada, given the fact that I grew up in Canada and I've lived in South Korea for just over 15 years now. And I've got 5 little areas that I thought I would talk about as fairly major differences between the two countries. And then I would follow up by talking about how I have adjusted to the different lifestyles. So that's kind of at the end of the video. How has the, how did that initial culture shock wear off? How long did it take? And how did I get used to being here? So that's the context for today's video. So South Korea versus Canada. Number 1, here we go. Ilban, technology versus natural resources. So this is a big one. Now, it's not to say that Korea does not have any natural resources, and it does not say that Canada does not have technology, because of course that's not the case. But historically, at least, where our major emphasis has been, both in Korea and Canada, is on these two particular dominant fields. In Canada, we have a large amount of natural resources that we have access to. Not only do we have fossil fuels such as natural gas, oil, the tar sands in Alberta, but of course we have other things like fisheries. We have what's the other way? Forestry and those sorts of commercial natural resources that are used not only in the country but exported to other places. Whereas in South Korea, of course, there is a major emphasis on technological development and the exporting of those technologies to other countries. Biggest, probably the most, the easiest one for all of us to understand, of course, would be Samsung and the cellular unit, particularly the development of the S10s, the S series phones, the semiconductor chip that's used, all sorts of things that are kind of just spread out all over the world. I mean, think about how many countries in the world have Samsung high definition TV screens or monitors, or that they use the RAM chips in their phones and in their computers. So it is quite ubiquitous, not only within Korea, but also, of course, in the world. So that is number one. And this is in no particular order. This is just how I wrote them down. So, number two, here we go. Work and school culture. Now, this is a really big one. This is a really big one. Canada does not have an SAT, similar as the United States or Korea. We don't have that system in place. Our high school graduates have different criteria by which they get accepted into university. This is primarily done through their academic scores in high school, as well as other things like volunteering, work experience, etc., that students might use as part of their application. Any kind of volunteer work that they do certainly comes into play with that. So there is fundamentally less focus on getting those high scores. It's true that you have to have those, of course. I mean, you do need to get good grades in high school. That is something that students need to work on. However, the other thing that's interesting about school is that not everybody wants to or needs to go to university. There are a large number of jobs that people can have very good, comfortable lives with without a university degree. For example, I'm thinking more in the trade professions, woodworking, welding, construction, other things like that are quite needed, in fact, and there are generally not enough uh, people to fill those jobs. Automotive, perhaps, or automotive technician, perhaps would be another one of those trades. So that's a big difference. The idea of a KSAT or an SAT doesn't exist in Korea. Another thing that's different is we do not have cram schools in Canada. Um, and in fact, a great deal of the work that we do in the for high school, I'll use high school as an example. In high school, most of the work is done in class. There is, of course, some homework, especially when it comes time to midterm exams or final exams of the semester. But in reality, there's not that much homework, not like what there is in Korea. So when I was teaching in Canada, um, school would start at around 8:30, maybe 8 o'clock, and we would be finished by about 2:30, and we're done. The students go home 2:30 in the afternoon. So there's still a number of classes they do. Obviously, the similar courses that you would do here in Korea are done in Canada: math, science, history, language arts, English. We also have uh, other technical classes that students can involve in, include woodworking, mechanics, PE classes, of course, is something else that we have. We have a range of science classes, including physics, biology, chemistry. We have various math courses, calculus, etc. Business math, which is more practical. So there are certainly similarities in terms of the types of courses that you would seek out at university, but or at high school. But the other thing that's interesting is that there is two sections of your high school diploma in school. So you have required courses that are a certain number of courses that you must take, and then you have something called elective courses. Now, electives give the students the freedom to choose the areas that they want to focus in a lot more. This is done somewhat within Korean schools. You have the science the science avenue and then the social arts avenue. So that's similar, but the amount of courses that we can choose from is much wider. And so because of that, we're able to almost have like a mini specialization within our high school diploma that can then lead forward into other things in university. So, for example, one of the things I really heavily focused on was history when I was in high school, and then once I got to university, I minored in history. I majored in world religions, which actually has a very large historical component to it, and those two things fit well together. As I said, there are no cram schools, there are no academies like there are here in Korea, where you spend 7 8 hours at school, you take a quick break, you go to several academies, you come home at 8 9 10 o'clock at night. That simply doesn't happen. And in fact, a lot of students are out in the world. They're out doing jobs of some various type. When I was in high school, I worked at Burger King for 3 years, actually even more than that. And those jobs that students do have an educational value. We learn certain skills that are very real world. It's not simply just head knowledge that we're learning, but in fact, we take what we learn in school and can, depending on the job that we're doing, apply some of those things to our work. Also, of course, it gives us a little bit of extra money while we're in high school, so we don't have to constantly bug our parents to pay for stuff. So that is something that is very, very different between Korea and Canada in terms of work and school life. Um, Number three, this is a big one too. In Canada, the Canada is very, very multicultural. You walk down, the downtown Toronto, for example, and you are likely to come across probably 20 or 30 different nationalities just walking down the street, or perhaps walking in amongst the Eaton Center or other places uh, where consumer goods are sold. So it's and even in our workplaces are also obviously very multicultural. And this is because Canada puts a large focus on immigration from other countries to fill in the population gap, of course, because there's a big difference between the population of Korea and Canada. Probably close to 10 to 12 million, I would imagine, difference there. Canada being the lower number. Um, so that is something also that is quite a bit different. Whereas Korea, as you well know, is far more homogeneous. The number of foreign residents in Korea is going up, and in fact, when I first arrived in 2005, that I think the number of foreigners living in Korea was about 500,000, maybe 600,000, and now we're over 2 million. So in that 15-year period, there has been a large change in the influx of foreigners who come here for work or for marriage and who end up making Korea their home, just like me. Um, the fourth thing is has applications in society generally, but also in your job specifically, and that is the difference between a hierarchical versus a vertical management system. Now, this is more, it's not to say that a vertical management system does not have someone in charge, because in fact that is the case. There is always a CFO or a CEO or someone who is in charge of the company. Somebody has to make the decisions. Um, but what often happens in Canadian businesses and employment is there is a lot more equity between the individuals that are working in the job. Um, it's true that we do have systems in place. I'm thinking specifically of teaching, just because that's what I'm most familiar with. There is a seniority system within the teaching system. Uh, and you have a mentoring system where an older teacher will help mentor a younger teacher for 2 to 3 years in order to get them properly established and well prepared for their long term career. In Korea, however, it is quite a bit different. The notion of junior senior is really taken quite seriously. And as you well know, if you are a junior and you see a senior, even when that person is in your department and they're still at university, there is the honorific, the bows, etc., that are quite often done between student to student because of the junior senior uh, system. And that follows quite heavily into the business and workplace settings. Now, there have been some changes, especially brought about a couple of years ago with the Me Too movement, where things are not as rigid, but those things are hard to come by, hard to let go, I think, for some people. So I would say that that system really is still much in place. Now, the last thing I would discuss in terms of the differences between Canada and the United States, or Canada and South Korea, pardon me, is the cost of living versus taxation. Now, the cost of living generally in Canada is far higher. I went back to Canada in the summer of 2019, and I'll use a restaurant meal as an example. Now, I took my dad and my sister out for a really nice dinner the night before I left to come back to Korea, and we went to a steakhouse, a little bit more, let's say, than Outback. All right, so if Outback is here, then this is a little bit higher class. Not much, but a little bit. And it's a nice place to eat. How much do you think that cost us? Well, let's put it into context. Let's see, I'm trying to think of what we had. Let's say we had, there's 3 steaks. We have 3 steaks plus with our meal, etc. We had a couple of drinks. That meal probably would cost about 120,000 won ish, maybe. That meal in Canada, including the tip, all right, because tipping is something that is not done in Korea, including the tip of 10 to 15%, that was roughly 275,000 won. So we're talking a huge difference in the amount of money that you spend just at the restaurant in order to go out for a nice meal. Big difference in cost of living. Absolutely. Of course, there are other things in terms of cost of living I won't get into, but the cost of living certainly is a very big difference in Canada. Now, it's true that in many jobs, the cost of living uh, is kind of is dealt with your salary. So the cost of you, most people, when they have the yearly raise, they have a cost of living bonus added onto their next year's paycheck because of the cost of living goes up by a certain percentage points every year. So that is something that is taken into account in some jobs, though I wouldn't say all jobs are like that. Certainly, teaching is one of those jobs that is taken into account. My sister's job, she works at the Royal Bank of Canada. She has a cost of living increase about 2 or 3% per year, I believe, added into her bonus structure that she gets at the company. And also, in terms of finances, I would say the other aspect of the cost of living would be taxation. The tax rate is pretty low overall here in Korea. Obviously, that's going to depend on the amount of money that you're making, just like it is in just like it is in Canada. So if you make, if this is your tax bracket, you have a certain amount of taxes. If your tax bracket increases, obviously the rate of taxes increases as well. But my sister making $55,000 a year is being taxed at around 45%. So that is a huge chunk of tax that comes off. Now, of course, there are taxation benefits that go into the government coffers. Things like healthcare, for example, is not paid for. So we would have to, in Korea, we pay something when we leave the doctor. Usually it's not very much. It's a much better system than the United States, mind you. But if I go to the hospital, let's say I break my arm, I go into the hospital and I come out of the hospital with a cast after x-rays, and I pay nothing because that comes out of my taxation dollars. So those are 5 big things that I think are different about Canada versus Korea. What do you think? What do you think living in Korea, the differences are between Canada and South Korea? I'd be interested to know. Pop a comment below. And again, if you have not subscribed, please do so. Let me know where you're from. Are you here in Korea? Are you elsewhere? And I hope you have a wonderful weekend. For my students, Monday and Wednesday, I'm sure, well, Wednesday, you're probably going to be seeing this video. So Monday and Wednesday students, you will have already had your exam. Good luck on that. I'm sure you will have done fine. Tuesday and Thursday is the following week. Anyway, thanks very much. This is Dr. B. And remember, be the revolution. Peace, everyone. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.